Hey again. All right, so let's continue talking about the endocrine system. And so now we've talked about the different types of hormones in that they're either amino acid based or steroid based, right? So now we want to talk about how they're regulated. And here we go. All right, so hormone regulation. So negative feedback. You thought, oh, it's coming back. All right, I never say never, right? So most hormones are regulated by negative feedback. There will be some that are positive feedback. I'm going to point those out to you. But right now, let's just make sure that you guys remember what negative feedback is. If you think about a stimulus, right? You have a stimulus. So for example, being cold, and so you're going to have the response, your muscles are going to shiver, that's going to generate heat, that's going to turn off the stimulus, right? So negative feedback is when the response shuts off the stimulus, okay? So hopefully you've got that. So the way hormones work is there's kind of an axis of endocrine organs in this particular picture I'm going to show you, and I'll give you several examples as we move along. This is kind of the most classic example of negative feedback. And so I've got the hypothalamus, okay, I've got the anterior pituitary, I've got the thyroid gland, and I've got target cells. And for thyroid gland, target cells, these are just about every cell in your body, all right? So the way this works is the hypothalamus, okay, we really haven't talked too much about this, but trust me on this, the hypothalamus is an endocrine organ, and it secretes something called TRH, and you'll know what TRH stands for later. It's thyrotropin releasing hormone, but you'll get there. It releases a hormone, okay, which goes to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is its target, okay? The anterior pituitary is stimulated in response to TRH to send out TSH. So it releases thyroid stimulating hormone, all right? The target for thyroid stimulating hormone is the thyroid gland. So when thyroid stimulating hormone has been released from the anterior pituitary, goes out to the thyroid gland, it causes the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormone is what you measure in your blood, and that thyroid hormone, usually T3, T4, goes out to those target cells and causes them to do what they're going to do. Now, as levels of thyroid hormone, if you have enough, if the levels are rising, okay, then those rising levels, they're in the blood, they're going to feed back and say, okay, anterior pituitary, we don't need any more TSH. There's plenty of T3, T4 out there. Going to go back and tell the hypothalamus, we don't need any TRH. So it's going to go back and shut off that stimulus. It's going to shut off that production of hormones. And so it's kind of like a teeter-totter. Again, so if you don't have enough T3 and T4, there's not enough thyroid hormone out there, then you're not blocking it, right? So you're going to continue to have TRH, TSH, and thyroid hormone. So again, it's negative feedback, and we'll do this multiple times, so you're going to get the hang of it. But this is kind of the classic example of how that works, okay? So when we think about what controls hormone release, it's how much is in the blood, okay? So blood levels of hormones are going to be controlled by negative feedback mechanisms. We want to control how much hormone is in the blood, and we do that using typically negative feedback. Again, I never say never, so there are some positive feedback mechanisms. Hormone levels don't vary a whole lot. There's kind of a very narrow range that we maintain our hormones to stay in hormonal balance. So when you hear your hormones are out of whack, maybe something's going on and you've got too much or too little of something. And so we're going to use the words hyper and hypo a lot. Hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism. We're going to talk about too many hormones, too much hormone, too little hormone. So unless you're hyper something or hypo something, you try to keep it in a fairly level homeostatic range. Now, things that can help regulate how much hormone is released out in the blood, it tends to be regulated in three different ways. There's either going to be a humoral stimulus that causes your endocrine glands to synthesize and release hormones. There could be a neural stimulus to cause an endocrine gland to synthesize or to make and release the hormone. Or there can be a hormonal stimulus to cause the endocrine gland to synthesize and release the hormone. So I'm going to give you some examples of what's a humoral stimulus, a neural stimulus, and a hormonal stimulus. And as you move through this unit and we start talking about different organs and different hormones, you need to kind of start classifying these. Are they responding to a humoral event? Is it a neural event? Is it a hormonal event? And I'll usually kind of give you that information as I'm lecturing, but I'm just telling you now, there's a lot for me to say and there's a lot to cover. If I forget to say, oh yeah, by the way, this is humoral, this is neural, this is hormonal, go look in the book, make sure you know, okay? So examples of humoral. When we say humoral, what we're saying is it's something in the blood, okay? So a changing blood level of an ion or a nutrient causes the release and the secretion of a hormone, all right? So, for example, levels of calcium in your blood, levels of glucose in your blood. Some ion or nutrient is in your blood, and changing levels of that causes the release of an endocrine hormone. So in this case, we've got an example of calcium levels in the blood. If calcium levels are low, if you've got falling calcium levels, what that does is it causes the parathyroid hormone, the parathyroid gland, which are on the back side, the posterior side of the thyroid gland. Hopefully you remember that from your bone unit. So you have your parathyroid glands on the back of the thyroid, and they are going to secrete parathyroid hormone. Right? Parathyroid hormone is abbreviated PTH. Okay? Parathyroid hormone, if you think way back to the bones, it actually kind of goes out to the bones and causes the osteoclasts to start to dissolve bone matrix, which is releasing calcium. That will release calcium into the blood. Okay? That will cause calcium levels to rise, and so rising calcium levels will then shut off the parathyroid hormone from being released. Negative feedback. So humoral is going to be something in the blood, some rising or low, declining level of an ion or a nutrient causing the direct secretion of a hormone. A neural stimulus means the nervous system causes the direct release of the hormone. And so in this example, we have the sympathetic nervous system. So remember, you have your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, and then your peripheral nervous system. If you divide that out into somatic, and you have your autonomic nervous system, you have parasympathetic and sympathetic. You guys hopefully remember that. If don't, go back and look at it because we're bringing this stuff forward. So the sympathetic nervous system, they actually innervate the adrenal gland, okay? And the specific part of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal medulla, which is kind of the middle of the adrenal gland. And that causes the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, also called catecholamines. And they release these hormones into the blood. So you probably remember epinephrine and norepinephrine as neurotransmitters. They're neurotransmitters in the nervous system, but when they're secreted by the adrenal gland, they're going to go out into the blood as hormones. So this is when you have that fight or flight response, and so maybe you need a little extra boost. I always tell my students when you're getting neurostimulation of your adrenal gland, that's thinking about you need to lift a bus off of somebody. You need that extra boost of adrenaline, and so you're calling on your adrenal gland to release extra epinephrine and norepinephrine to increase that sympathetic fight or flight response. So that's a neural stimulus. Okay. The last stimulus is a hormonal stimulus, and that means one hormone causes another hormone to be released. All right, so a hormone release is caused by another hormone. All right, so in this case, hypothalamic hormones, hormones that are made in the hypothalamus, are going to cause the anterior pituitary to release hormones. Okay, and then these anterior pituitary hormones, they can go out to other endocrine glands and cause even more hormones to be released. So it's one gland making a hormone that goes to another gland, causing that gland to even make more hormones and release hormones. Okay, so this is your hypothalamic pituitary target loop. So this is what I was showing you earlier. So if you have enough thyroid hormone, then it's going to feed back and say, okay, anterior pituitary, don't need any more. Okay, hypothalamus, don't need any more. All right, and this is going to work. That same axis is going to work for a lot of different hormonal stimulus type hormones, and we're going to go over those as we move through. So again, you have neural stimulus, hormonal stimulus, and humoral stimulus. Now, The nervous system always, it's kind of the ultimate control mechanism, okay? So it can modify the stimulation of endocrine glands. So, for example, under severe stress, your hypothalamus and sympathetic nervous system can do things like make glucose levels rise so that you can get an increased level of glucose so that you can make more ATP and then, run away from whatever big scary thing is coming after you. All right, so what I want you to take away from that is the nervous system can override your normal endocrine controls. It's the ultimate control center. So it can modulate, in some cases, the endocrine system. And we should bring those up as we move along as well. We'll talk about that also when we talk about labor and delivery and lactation. Milk when you nurse a baby, there's some neural controls that are involved in lactation. All right, so how do these hormones get to where they're to their target? Well, we know they're in the blood. And how do they circulate in the blood? Are they just freely floating around? Are they carried by something? How do we get those hormones in the blood? Well, your steroid hormones and your thyroid hormones, they're usually attached to big plasma proteins. So they kind of they catch a ride and they're transported through the blood on these large plasma proteins. Your other hormones, your amino acid-based hormones, they can just circulate without a carrier. All right? And so the amount of, the concentration of these hormones will basically reflect how fast are they being released. So if they're being released fast, you'll have a high concentration. If they're being released slow, your concentrations will be low. It also depends on how long they stay in the blood. How fast are they inactivated? How fast are they removed from the body? Do they stay for a long time? Do they act for a long time? Or are they short acting hormones? So we're going to talk about how do we remove a hormone? So what gets rid of hormones? Once they're made by hormone endocrine organs and released into the blood, do they just stay there forever? Or do we get rid of them? Well, obviously we have to maintain homeostasis, which means we have to maintain levels of hormones, which means we have to get rid of them. Okay, we have to degrade them and then make more as needed and secrete more as needed. So some of the things that you have to remove hormones from the blood are some enzymes, degrading enzymes. Think back to acetylcholine and acetylcholinesterase. So you can break down neurotransmitters. Same types of things you can break down hormones. There's enzymes that do that. The liver and the kidneys also play a role in removing hormones from the blood. So one of the things that when you're looking at maybe someone's hormone levels and you're trying to see, are they regulated? Do they need more or less? Are they hyper or hypo this or hyper or hypo that? Is how long does it take for their body to eliminate 50% of their hormones? And that's called the half-life. And so that's the amount of time it takes to remove or eliminate 50% of a substance from the body, and that can be minutes or weeks. And so that's one of the things that you can look at is how long a hormone is staying around in your body. Is it long-acting or short-acting? Hormones that typically have a short half-life, what they usually do, their mechanism of action, is they alter the activity of an existing protein in the target cell. So they kind of go in and turn it on or turn it off. So it's just, and they don't need to be around very long. Kind of like acetylcholine. It goes in, it binds that receptor and causes like the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. It goes in, binds the receptor on the muscle cell, then acetylcholinesterase gets rid of it. So it doesn't last very long. It has a short half-life. Hormones that typically have long half-lives, these can last, weeks. They tend to cause the production of new proteins. Okay, so there are going to be things that cause you to build things. So instead of a turn off, turn on, they're going to be metabolic, causing you to grow, to build, okay, or to produce more proteins. Okay. How quickly do hormones work? So some responses are immediate. I mean, they bind and they cause an immediate response. Some things can take hours to days. These are especially true for steroid hormones. Some hormones don't even do anything until they're activated, and they don't even get activated until they get to their target cell. So hopefully as we move along, I'm going to try to mention all of these things. But again, as I'm talking to you now and when I get to talking in some of these lectures, sometimes things will slip my mind. So you need to understand, for all your hormones. What's their response time? What's the onset of hormone activity? Is it fast? Is it slow? How long does it last? What's the duration? Is it a couple of seconds or a couple of hours? Um, uh, and again, we'll talk about some of these as we move through our lecture. Hormone activity effects almost always disappear and decrease as blood levels drop. So you're not going to get effects of hormones as blood levels tend to decline. But there are a couple of hormones that will give you effects at low blood levels. So again, these are things you kind of need to be listening for and looking for in your book as you move along through each hormone. So as we're moving along for hormones, you're going to want to know, which gland makes it. What type of hormone is it? Is it a steroid hormone? Is it an amino acid hormone? So that does it bind a membrane receptor? Does it go inside the cell? Does it cause that G protein second messenger system? How long does it last? How fast does it cause a response? All these things are things you're going to be looking for as we move through and talk about these hormones. Okay, so a lot of information, but again, all of this is found either within my lecture or in the book. This is one of those units you'll definitely need to look in your book for details. Okay. All right. One more thing I want to talk about is how hormones can interact at a target cell. So when you think about a cell, a target cell, some cells only respond to maybe one type of hormone, but most cells have several different types of receptors. So they're going to have, a receptor that looks like that, and they're going to have one that's like that, and those all look the same, but they're going to have one that can bind X and one that can bind Y and one that can bind Z. So it depends on the target cell and how many receptors it has. So a lot of hormones are going, multiple hormones may go to a target cell at the same time. So what happens if more than one hormone is released and goes to the same target cell? Well, they may be permissive. And that means one hormone can't do anything unless the other one's there. Okay, so in order to get the effect, both hormones have to be there. You have to have permission. Okay, so you have to have permissive hormones. If you have two hormones getting there at the same time, or three or four, you may have synergism, which means one hormone produces the same effect, and that will allow for amplification, so you get a bigger response. You can also have antagonism, where you have one or more hormones that do the opposite thing. And you should have already learned about this with bone, like calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. One raises blood calcium levels and one lowers blood calcium levels. Do you remember which one? What did you think on that? We're going to talk about it, but I bet you, let's see if you can think about it. So parathyroid hormone and calcitonin will be antagonists. Insulin and glucagon, these have to do with the regulation of blood sugar. One increases blood sugar in your blood, one decreases blood sugar in your blood. Okay, so antagonists. All right, so that's the end of that. So now we should be moving into your actual endocrine organs and the hormones they produce and how they work. Thanks a lot.